president. Mexico elects Porfirio Diaz president. For more than 30 years, he will rule Mexico with an iron fist in what will become known as the Porfiriato. To some, he is the benevolent father, the peacemaker, but to others, the traitor, the man who gave Mexico away to the foreigners.
The Porfiriato is, in some ways, the beginning of that peculiar relationship between Mexico and the United States. The Porfiristas believed, given the economic thinking of that time, that the way to move ahead was to open the gates to foreign investment. Mexico was right next to the United States, so Mexico was largely an economic colony of the United States by 1900.
The center of power during the Porfiriato is Mexico City. Here, Diaz surrounds himself by a group of technocrats known as the científicos. This circle of power controls much of the nation's wealth, with little regard for anyone outside their circle.
The científicos were the people who implemented his economic policies. These were the people who wrote the legislation for the passage of laws. These were the people who put together the contracts between the Mexican government and foreign companies and so on. They were elitist. Some of them were racist. That is, they believed in the notion that the biggest problem that Mexico faced was its backward Indian population.
You Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. Greetings, friends, comrades, and enemies. We are broadcasting live from Brooklyn, USA, where left is best, as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Leck. Say the yo real quick before you do the tech fix.
Yo.
Head theoretician David Griscom. Don't panic, whatever it is. Oh, he couldn't even be heard. He did panic a little bit. It's all right, David. On this week's program, Chris Maisano. He's a labor writer for the Jacobin magazine and a member of the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. We are talking about labor after Janus, the Supreme Court's attack on the remnants of America's labor culture. Can labor be reinvented, re-radicalized, renewed to meet the needs of an oligarchic 21st century, to defeat that plutocracy, defeat that oligarchy? Then, Bree Joy Gray, she's back. She's the editor, politics editor for The Intercept. We're talking about why socialism wins the victory of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Ocasio-Cortez. I knew that was going to happen. Just going to have to bear with me. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Her victory, what that means, why socialism wins, and why the mainstream media is still refusing to get it. Plus, Jake Flores, very funny man, at least according to everybody besides that fascist thug organization, ICE. He's in studio. He's going to join us, and we're going to cover a lot more. Plus, of course, we have a gulag, and these guys really need it because we're going to need to save America from them too. And we have an economic minute with a temporarily panicked but now restored David Griscom. All that and much, much more on this week's Michael Brooks Show. Let's get it. First, we need to start with some positive news from Mexico. Andres Obrador, that country's leftist candidate, populist center-left candidate, depending on how we're defining the terminology, the candidate certainly of the left electoral preference in Mexico, was elected president just a couple of days ago. And before we break this down further and get into the incredible failings of John Oliver when speaking about Latin America, let's play a clip of the president-elect Obrador, which, by the way, translates to something analogous to a worker, I am told, into English, which is an interesting namesake. Here he is really indicating that he is more of a Lula than a Chavez as he speaks to supporters in his victory rally. Andrés López Obrador.
The new project of the nation will seek to establish an authentic democracy. We don't bet on building an open or closed dictatorship. The changes will be profound, but will happen with a strict adherence to the legal established order. There will be corporate freedom, freedom of expression, of association, and of beliefs. We will guarantee all the individual and social freedoms, as well as the political rights of citizens, consecrated in our Constitution. There will be no need to increase taxes in real terms, not for the country to fall into debt. There will also be no hikes in petrol. I will lower the general cost of living and the public investment to propel productive activities and to create jobs. The objective is to strengthen the internal market, to try to produce what we consume in the country. We won't act in an arbitrary way, and there will be no confiscation or expropriation of property. The transformation will consist in basically banishing corruption from our country. We won't have a problem in achieving this objective because the people of Mexico are the heir of great civilizations.
So let's be clear. He's talking about a corruption which is very serious in Mexico, and he is, in some ways, obviously ruling out much more radical reforms, which will, in fact, need to happen. But the nexus of cartels and the main political parties, besides Morena, the newly formed party created by Andrés López Obrador, along with the traditional oligarchic and corrupt interests and clientelist networks that run Mexican politics, do feed a system of corruption which entrenches and overlaps with U.S. foreign policy, Western corporate interests, United States corporate interests, to a system that not only doesn't work, but now has actually accelerated violence, brutality, and neoliberal entrenchment. So he's right about that. He might be soft-pedaling other things. As I say, he's clearly trying to position himself in the Lula mode more than the Chavez mode, which the far-right campaigned against him as. Now, all that being said, does that speech remind you of anybody else? Well, about a week or so ago, a couple weeks ago, another speech, or his more accurately, his campaigning in general, did make Obrador remind John Oliver of another figure.
AMLO's goals may be clear, but the details of how he plans to achieve them can be pretty sketchy. His opponents have attacked him as a dangerous leftist, but journalists who've covered him say it's hard to judge things based on his policy platforms because they're prone to change, often seemingly overnight, and that he often makes big promises while keeping his own advisors guessing as to what he really means. So in that way, he's actually more reminiscent of a Mexican Donald Trump, which I know is a weird image to conjure up, like Orthodox Hitler or...
So that's ridiculous, condescending, and foolish on so many levels, it could almost make you nauseous. In fact, it does make me nauseous. The arrogant, paternalist stupidity of that comment. Cursory research would show you two really clear things. One, Andrés López Obrador comes from the left tradition, which has almost entirely died inside the PRI, the Institutional Revolutionary Party of Mexico, a party which has existed for over 70 years and did contain a populist left contingent in the 70s when Obrador got his start in politics. He later would leave the party, found another party that was a party of the left, and more recently, AMLO, as he is called there, and his commonly used nickname, would go on to found Morena, a new party, because, in fact, of a falling out with the left breakoff party because of their falls into corruption and clientelism. We also know that he was a successful leader of Mexico City. That's his ideology. And the compromises and networks that he has built to win this election, some of which are very unappealing and very problematic, are the product of the constituency building and coalition assembly that any single candidate would have to do in order to win in any democracy. John Oliver's arrogance and delusion and obsession with details, by the way, details about policy that AMLO supposedly is not fulfilling, while John Oliver cannot fulfill the details of AMLO's politics with a staff of however many people he has at HBO. None of that in the segment. Just a bunch of bullshit about, well, it sounds like Trump, I guess, because, you know, they both don't like the elites or some other nonsense. And this fits a pattern. John Oliver recently did another segment on Venezuela. Let's condense this down really simply. I've said before, I'm not going to defend certain policies of the Maduro government and not be real about Venezuela. But from a U.S. perspective, I would argue that the most important and paramount thing is to oppose U.S. intervention and destabilization of sovereign nations, period. The United States supported a coup under the Bush administration in 2002, a fact that Oliver didn't even mention in a segment where he blithely dismissed all talk from the Venezuelan government about U.S. interference. Okay, 2002, I guess that's a little bit ago. Maybe it's not relevant to mention that we actively celebrated a coup when you're dismissing Maduro's fears as delusions, because, I don't know, that might get in the way of a Maduro empanada joke or something you're trying to land. Okay, fair enough. But how about in 2017, Mike Pompeo, as head of the CIA, now head of the State Department, publicly saying that the agency was looking for ways of dislodging the Venezuelan government? Hopefully there can be a transition in Venezuela, and we, the CIA, are doing its best to understand the dynamics there, Pompeo said. I was just down in Mexico City and in Bogota last week where we were talking about this very issue. That's really interesting. The head of the CIA. Right. You were in neighboring right-lean, or not one, in Colombia, in hemispheric right-leaning countries to talk about the CIA's role in a transition in Venezuela. We know that the sanctions, we know that the Venezuelan corporate sector and opposition movement have been connected in some respects to the CIA, and we know that there is an active plan there that in some respects really does mirror, in his example, the destabilization policies in the 1970s in Jamaica. Does this mean that there have not been failings in Venezuela? Absolutely not. But it does mean that John Oliver did a pathetic one-sided segment where he didn't even acknowledge basic facts. In Brazil, several years ago, he did a segment which the opposition that, of course, burgeoned into the lawfare coup that removed Dilma Rousseff on a technicality and has now imprisoned Lula da Silva, ran with and posted all over social media. So my request to you, John Oliver, is maybe do a follow-up segment in Mexico where you get some basic facts right about AMLO's politics and the coalition of people who are tired of being murdered, exploited, oppressed, and the dependence of extortionist clientele networks backed by the traditional parties and U.S. foreign policy. Maybe even loop around a little bit more and recognize that even though maybe your O.J. Simpson joke was cute about Venezuela, but you omitted two of the most important details anybody would need to have in order to comment on Venezuela appropriately with regards to U.S. foreign policy. And also maybe you shouldn't be sort of plaintively asking what the U.S. can do. The U.S. has done plenty in Latin America. Perhaps less is the answer. And three, it's okay that these segments are not as funny as they could be. Spend less time with the joke writers trying to do the dick and empanada jokes and more time with the researchers that can teach you that not everything in the world is Donald Trump. Or if it is Donald Trump, then just focus on Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the greatest menace on the planet right now. He is a massive asshole. You can get endless material out of him. Do it. But if you're going to venture outside of U.S. borders, better to know what the fuck you're talking about. Guys, I know David was very upset about this segment. He's a big John Oliver fan. David?
Yeah, I mean,
I pass it to you.
You know, John Oliver is actually one of the few lanyard liberals that I really like. But I mean, the comparison to Donald Trump is just so obnoxious on so many levels. And I just wanted to note two things about AMLO's policies that John Oliver missed.
Yep.
One was to demilitarize the southern border of Mexico with Guatemala, which is
quite Trump-like.
Yeah, exactly.
The idea of demilitarizing a border to improve human conditions there. Very another echo of Trump.
Another was to end to demilitarize the war on drugs in Mexico, which has led to quite scary results with soldiers and stuff like that.
Well, as Trump and Sessions have been working on, they're very concerned by the racial and social justice implications of a failed war on drugs. So I guess that's another good point.
And the last one is that the only AMLO has promised something that is very important, which is in the renegotiations of NAFTA to protect Mexican farmers from U.S. agriculture, which receives incredible subsidies, which is not very much in the spirit of free trade, and it's been devastating to the people. But of course, AMLO has to be this vague politician who's just promising whatever. And instead, if you could really take a moment and look at for a second at like the conditions of Mexico and why for a moment that a left politician who's challenging the structure that has sort of destroyed the people of Mexico and put them into this very difficult situation, why that would mean something to them, I don't know. It's just like you don't even need to be a really smart person when it comes to politics to understand why this is happening.
Let me just add really quickly. He completely uncritically talked about the Venezuelan opposition. And I want to be really clear. There is ample legitimate grievance in Venezuela against the Maduro government. Let's not be delusional. But he had no conversation about any of the violent tactics that some of them have employed, which if you want to, I'm certain that John Oliver is not a sympathizer of any type of violent insurrection. He didn't mention that. And with regards to Mexico, he talked about in 2006 when AMLO protested a nail-biter election, which he lost, which was he said was fraudulent loss. That is at the very least, we could say it is a highly credible argument that election
at 1%
was stolen.
of the vote.
Less than 1%. Yeah. And a lot of people think it was stolen. And in this election, a lot of people and politicians associated with reform were murdered by cartels during the campaign. So maybe his protesting on the streets of Mexico City in 2006, what many thought was a stolen election, was not just a irrational sore loser syndrome.
I actually probably have the longest experience with John Oliver.
Pray tell.
Listened to his podcast, The Bugle, back when it was still hosted by, I don't think it was the News of the World. What's the Times?
Yeah.
Rupert Murdoch owned. And that is some of the best podcasting ever when they're talking about the phone hacking scandal with Rupert Murdoch, while Rupert Murdoch doesn't realize that he's publishing their podcast or doesn't really notice that they're even doing it. But every once in a while they tap on the mic, is anybody to listen to this? That's a great podcast. And then they kept it on, and it still persists without John Oliver. But yeah, I think I missed that podcast. I don't really watch his HBO show. Like if I watch late night shows, I think, Desus and Mero is the best one.
Desus and Mero is by far the best one. That's the only one I ever watched. Desus and Mero and Viceland.
And that's not even really politics.
No, it's mainly pop culture, but they're smarter about politics than most people who try to do politics.
Yeah, Jim Jeffries is better than John Oliver is. John Oliver, I mean, nothing's as bad as The Daily Show, but
I don't watch The Daily Show.
If I have to watch, John Oliver, I don't hate it.
Yeah,
his domestic stuff is good, but he did the China bit. I thought that was weird. Just the tone is off. It does seem like it's Voice of America, like propaganda sometimes.
Yeah, it's embarrassing. All right, we're gonna do a little bit of a shout out. We're running a few minutes behind, but that's fine. Let's play the shout out to get us in the mood of the shout out. Shout out. Alex Jones and AMLO are really similar because they both don't like the government.
Danarchy.
I don't want to get greedy, but if Danarchy could give us a shout out beat, that would be ill. top-of-the-line professionalism. Let's get to the shout-out.
Shout-out, shout-out. Creepy. Shout-out, shout-out, shout-out. Weird. I think that's creepy. It's incredible. Shout-out, 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 shout-out. This is crazy. Shout-out, 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 shout-out. This is out of control. Shout-out, shout-out. That's creepy. Shout-out, shout-out. That's weird. Shout-out. Creepy. Shout-out. Weird. Shout-out. Crazy. Shout-out, shout-out. This is crazy. Shout-out. This is out of control. Shout-out. This is weird. Shout-out, 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 shout-out.
The shout out is to every piece of resistance that has been happening in the last week or so. You know, I was off last week taking some vacation time, and it was a very upsetting week. There was a lot of static. And there was also, but, you know, static, we brought our own static to the fight against the inhumane, the fascist, the grotesque forces that are running this country, including, as an example, we're playing some footage of this Occupy ICE encampment in Portland, some truly important and aggressive activism, and exactly the type of thing that needs to be happening everywhere across the country. There was also moves, as an example, to not, sit down the daily propagandist Sarah Huckabee at a restaurant in Virginia. Other administration officials had their meals disrupted, which, according to a lot of the sort of leading lights of the mediocrities that still preside over the centrist consensus of this country, of course, was really morally analogous to kidnapping children and holding them in cages and terrorizing families, obviously. Wouldn't want to have any incivility. And in the spirit of that delusion, which of course is the absolute obvious and inverse of the moral courage of the people who were outside protesting, occupying, disrupting the meals of administration officials across the country over this past week, was the centrist delusion, which has very deep roots. And I want to quote from these roots. This is an excerpt, and this has been looked into. I've actually triple-checked this, even just in prep, because it's sort of unbelievable. This is a Marshall McLuhan moment for the whole country and culture. This is a quote from a column that was released by one Henry Cadbury in the New York Times in 1934. And Mr. Cadbury was a professor. And he was also quite concerned, like another professor that's out there a lot these days, about apparently civility and humanity. But of course, only the civility and the humanity of those who are least in touch with their own humanity and causing the most harm to humanity. This is what Professor Cadbury had to say in 1934. By hating Hitler and trying to fight back, Jews are only increasing the severity of the policies against them. If Jews throughout the world would try to instill in the minds of Hitler and his supporters the recognition of the ideals from which the race stands, and if Jewish appeals to the German sense of justice and German national conscience, I am sure the problem would be solved more effectively and earlier than otherwise. The boycott against Germany, he asserted, is not an effective means of meeting the evil. Boycotts are simpler without bloodshed, and a war in any form is not going to right the wrongs inflicted on the Jewish people. So every concerned troll, from the editorial pages of the Washington Post, the New York Times, to I think even Joe Rogan, you are Cadbury today. That's who you are. And for those of you who are saying, oh, you making a comparison between ICE and the DHS is doing in the Nazis? Yeah, I am. Absolutely. Because a policy of terrorizing families, kidnapping children, is a prototyping of what is acceptable to humans. And you can be less dramatic. You can look at other systems we know of as great evil. Apartheid, South Africa. Sorry?
From our own country.
From our own country. From many moments in our own history. Lynchings, genocide, Apartheid here. What do Americans find normal? What do people accept? If you accept as a policy terrorizing children, putting them in cages, and of course, we already see all the stories of abuse that are not officially sanctioned, but go along with that. If you accept that, I don't know what that outcome is, but I do know what tradition you stand in. And you are either one of three things in that piece. You're the Nazis, you're Cadbury, and the other fucking delusional morons and enablers, or you're the people with clear moral conscience, clear eyes, and you know what the stakes are. Oh, here is a meeting of the sort of a fusion of Cadbury's, and I could potentially identify some potential Nazis in this group, but let's just stick with Cadbury's, of the most depressing group photo that I've seen in quite some time. We'll get to it more later. But I want to shout out again everybody who spoke. And don't look, when you act with that clarity and that purpose, you actually, in fact, are acting on behalf of everyone. Even the slobs and the fascists who might not think that's what they want. Believe me. So don't get in your head. Don't listen to the twerps who overthink it. They're Cadburys. They're irrelevant. You're right. Keep the pressure on. And we can absolutely win.
Do you see Walter Schaub, you know, the ethics guy?
Yeah.
Was saying how abolish ICE is a bit much and people should, like, slow their roll on that.
Oh,
stuff.
yeah, totally.
Like, I love these guys that become resistance heroes and use it basically just to, like, shit on shit. Or, like, I'm going to be the one who gets to decide when we pump the brakes.
It's their emotional comfort levels. They're not... It's all about their personal process, not what is as a reality. There's no internalization. I'm not saying, look, I think some protest methods are stupid. I am obviously extremely concerned about how the left presents and brands itself. Of course, all of these things are a given. But if you are saying, don't engage with this in a clear, purposeful, and direct manner, you are an enabler. You are a co-participant of that child in a cage, and you're acting because of either you're completely delusional or you're just uncomfortable. And I'm sorry, this isn't like, I don't know, maybe you don't want to have a conversation about what upsets you about what the coffee rinds your colleagues use at times, whatever it is. This isn't inter-office bullshit. This is humanity. Basic stakes. You get it or you don't. So I'd also invite them to wake the fuck up and join the people that we are shouting out, who are awake and doing these essential things. All right, we're going to talk a little bit, we're running a bit behind, but we're going to talk a little bit about why you should join, and then we'll be right back with Chris Maisano. So, as I say, we've been continuing to grow significantly, and there already is a lot of additional content. Woke Bros, the animations. This Sunday, Derek Davison and I are doing an illicit history. We're working backwards from Mike Pence's claim that Latin American countries should respect our borders like we respect theirs. And we're going to do a little exploration of that sort of idea of how we respect Latin America's borders from going back to the Roosevelt era to 2018. Maybe John Oliver could listen to it. Maybe he could become a patron, or somebody could. You know what? If you know John Oliver, send him a free link to that shit.
Maybe you help produce his show.
Yeah, maybe he'll learn something. Yeah, no problem. John, available to help you not embarrass yourself. This is the time of month where people are getting charged. And as I say, thank you all. Thank you to all patrons, and particularly, well, not to particularly anyone, but welcome new patrons. Make sure There were a lot of declines this month, so just make sure in terms of people's card information, not being up to date. So just always make sure that your card and your info is all good and good to go. You can set that up pretty easily on Patreon. We're closing in. 2,000 is in the horizon, and the Food Bucket Challenge. 3,000 patrons is going to be a lot less vile than that. I promise you. I think I'm getting close to fuck it, push-up contest. And then at 5,000, that one's going to be really intense. And 4,000, I haven't thought of yet. But 2,000 is the next goal. We got to get there soon. It's time. Patreon.com/TMBS. Patreon.com/TMBS. We will be right back with Chris Maisano on The Michael Brooks Show. Welcome back to The Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is Chris Maisano. He is a contributing editor at the Jacobin, a union staffer in New York. He's also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. He has several recent pieces in the Jacobin, including Labor's Choice after Janus. Chris, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So, before, let's just really set the stakes here. There was obviously last week was very much a reminder both of how much harm the Supreme Court does. I won't say can, it simply does. There are, I think, actually really significant lessons about the structural reforms that we need to have to the Supreme Court if we're going to have any kind of viability in a democracy. But also, this was a really serious direct body blow to unions in the Janus decision. And before we elaborate on that, maybe you can, give us more than the top line. What does this case do? Where does it come from? Who put it in the system? And what does it do to America's labor movement?
Sure. So there's really no sugarcoating this. It's a major defeat for a labor movement in the U.S. that's already pretty embattled. And it's the successful, culmination of years of right-wing judicial activism that's always been aimed at undermining organized labor's last kind of remaining stronghold in the public sector. And, it comes on the heels of a string of cases leading up to this one. Excuse me. And it comes, on the heels of years of successful attempts in a number of states around the country to do things like pass state-level right-to-work laws and other pieces of legislation that are aimed at undermining both public sector unions and labor as a whole. So, you can think back to the infamous Act 10 that Scott Walker pushed through in Wisconsin, I believe it was back in 2011, to right-to-work laws that were passed in Michigan and Indiana, in West Virginia, a number of other states that were traditionally strongholds of organized labor. Who is behind these cases? It's really no secret. People have done a lot of really good reporting on this question. It's right-wing outfits. It's pro-business groups. It's wealthy individuals, all of whom share, one thing in common, and that's a desire to undermine any force, any organized political force out there that potentially stands in the way of their agenda, potentially stands in the way of the right-wing, conservative, neoliberal agenda that seeks to redistribute wealth and income upwards and undermine any kind of form of popular power that might exist out there. That's kind of the back.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, no, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
What is the Janus decision? What was the specifics of this case, and what did the court actually decide?
Sure. So the court decided that something that was known as agency fees, which are payments that people who are employed in unionized public employment settings and unionized government settings could pay in lieu of a full membership dues payment. Typically, people would pay this if they did not want to pay for certain activities that unions would undertake that they disagreed with. Things like spending to support particular candidates or lobbying and things like that. This was the constitutionality of this was recognized originally in a 1977 court case called Abood versus Detroit Board of Education or something along those lines, which said that, which held that, government employers and unions could do this, could basically compel people to make these payments in lieu of membership dues because they also benefited from the collective bargaining, the terms of the collective bargaining agreement. They, even though they weren't paying full membership dues, they benefited from things like dues increases, access to the grievance procedure, arbitrations, other services that a union might provide. So that was kind of the sort of compromise that was arrived at in the 1970s, and which prevailed in many states and localities up until this agreement. And what this decision does is say that arrangement, that system of agency fees, is unconstitutional on First Amendment grounds. So what this plaintiff, Mark Janus, claimed is that these fees, these agency fees that he paid, were a form of compelled or forced speech because, in their view, even collective bargaining was political. It wasn't just, say, contributions to candidates or lobbying, but collective bargaining in the public sector in general is a form of political activity, and therefore any kind of state-backed compulsion to have people make these fee payments was unconstitutional, and therefore had to be struck down.
It's not. I mean, I hate when other people just do this myself, but I'll do this for a second. I'm going to indulge in some ridiculous legal analogies here, which don't exactly work, but are slightly provocative. It's almost analogous if somebody said, I sometimes or often, if I think about my phone bill as an example, give money to corporations that are absolutely loathsome and are menaces to public life. And I wish that my money wasn't being spent on everything from campaign contributions to union busting, in fact. And if I said, look, when I give my bill to, my cell provider, that money indirectly gets sloshed into campaign contributions, and that shouldn't happen. I mean, it's almost analogous in the sense that what this guy is saying is that he gets all these free services, but, he shouldn't have to pay for them, essentially. I mean, it's even more provocative because it's a free service, but in a sense.
Yeah, I hear you for sure. I mean, I think that there's a similar dynamic there, whether we're talking about, buying services from companies that then spend their revenues and their profits on, campaign contributions, or whether it's paying taxes to the government, which then in turn uses that money for things that you or I or many other people might disagree with.
Right. We don't like foreign interventions. I don't want to back. Yeah, exactly. I don't want my money to support the drone program. I mean, we could really follow this logic. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, to give the other side kind of the full benefit of the doubt, I think what they would claim, and I think that we should grapple with this and think about it, is that, in these sorts of employment contexts, usually the condition, like paying dues or paying a fee in those sorts of unionized settings, you had to do this as a condition of employment. So I think what they would say is that because of that, and because something like a union it's not the state, it's at least on one level a private or voluntary organization to some extent, that. This therefore means that you're being forced to support a private organization that you don't want to. Mm-hmm. So, just to kind of just to sort of flesh out, I guess, their version of the argument, I think that's what they would say.
So it would be more analogous if in my other gig, co-hosting Majority Report, if Sam demanded a kickback to his temple every month, I had a problem with that.
I hear you.
Yeah,
but it's whatever you think of their argument. I think there's all kinds of holes you can poke in it.
Poke
sure.
some holes. Well, poke some holes. You've been very in a popular term of a certain type of internet pendant, but in a good way. You've been very generous and good faith with their argument. How would you deconstruct it now that you've been honest and rigorous about it?
Well, sure. I mean, on one level, so the argument that the union in the case, and, I and other people who are part of the labor movement and sympathetic to the labor movement will make, is that there are some very good reasons why you would engage in this kind of system. To take a step back for a moment and to kind of provide some context here, which I think will eventually help in answering the question. So this kind of open shop, what's called an open shop system, what anti-union forces have opportunistically called right to work here in the U.S., where union membership is strictly voluntary. It's quite common in a lot of other countries. So in a lot of other countries, there isn't this kind of system. Union membership is strictly voluntary. You join a union if you want to. You pay dues to it if you want to, and if you don't, then you don't. Also, a lot of times there's like multiple unions, very often aligned with different political parties or political movements, and you can join, whichever one you want. If you're a Catholic worker,
sector union, like you might have like in Jamaica as an example, I think unions that are more specifically, it's not necessarily like a building trades necessarily. It could be more like, well, we're the union that aligns with the Labor Party or the People's National Party. Is that what you're saying?
Precisely. Okay. Yeah, that's one example. There's all kinds of other examples. So, this sort of totally voluntary system of union membership is quite common in a lot of other places. And, I think works well in a lot of other places. The big difference between, I think, the U.S. and a lot of these other countries is that in many other countries, they have, industry-wide or sector level bargaining, collective bargaining. Whereas here in the U.S., they mostly have, enterprise or firm-based bargaining. So, when the union organizes and it's engaged in collective bargaining and negotiations with an employer, it's doing so with a single employer. And it's not happening across an entire industry, covering all the employers or all the workers in that particular industry. So when you're doing bargaining at that low of a level, which we do here in the U.S., it puts the union oftentimes in a very kind of difficult spot. It really is very advantageous to the employer typically to be doing things at that level. So if you're in a situation where, people can opt out, they can join, they can drop at any time, this creates all kinds of what are known as like free rider problems, and so on and so forth, which can make it very difficult for the union to maintain itself and to be strong in its dealings with management if this is the case. So, adopting that kind of system ensures both that, it's fair. People who defend this kind of system from the labor movement side typically didn't refer to these sorts of things as agency fees. One, because it's like super arcane and no one's going to know what that means. But also because, it ensures these payments ensure the level of fairness. So people call them oftentimes fair share fees because, unions, therefore, the trade-off is there's one union in the shop and people have to pay dues or fees to it. But the trade-off for the union is that they also have a legal duty to represent everyone in the bargaining unit equally. And that's known as the duty of fair representation. So, the idea is if the union has to represent everyone in the bargaining unit, regardless of whether they're paying their full dues or something like an agency fee, then, people should also have to, pay their fair share and pay to support the services that they're benefiting from.
So, look, as you say, this is a real blow. And it's in a context, obviously, in some ways of the sort of going back to the 70s, if you want to put it in this sort of broader, narrative of the counter, the sort of war that has always been waged by industry in this country, particularly elsewhere as well. But to some of the successes and breakthroughs from the, Roosevelt through Johnson era roughly speaking. And, and we need to take all of these, very seriously and see a system of policy behind it. Potentially a conversation for another day might also look at some of the, mistakes that labor leadership has made itself, getting potentially complacent in certain ways, or the sort of, some of the internal contradictions of, being, major shareholders in pension funds and kind of benefiting abstractly from certain trends in globalization with, on the other hand, the tension of needing to, react to the threats of those policies. I mean, there's a lot of conversations we can have which are really important, and hopefully we'll have many more, you and I, on this show. But that being said, if we're just, staying in the present tense, it does seem like, okay, we had this major hit. And it also has happened in a time when, many of us were obviously very inspired by the teachers' strikes that have been happening across the country, even going back actually not just in the last year, but actually back to, I think, 2012 in Chicago was an incredibly important moment. There's this, struggle for 15. There is a broader political atmosphere that for the first time in quite some time does seem to sort of indicate that people actually are getting to be reacquainted with just how important unions are. So with that kind of broad lead-in, I mean, is there that opportunity for a kind of necessary revived radicalism in American labor, and what might that look like?
Sure. Yeah, I think the confluence of these two events, the recent wave of strikes in public education, and then this Janus case happening, more or less at the same time, really does underscore, I think, the fundamental reality here, which is that labor's got kind of a polarization of choices in front of it. It's either a doubling down on the structures, strategies, orientations of the last, say, 40 years or so, or something of a reversion to the forms of collective action that really characterized the formative period of the labor movement's history, and in particular, public sector labor's history. I think that's really the fundamental dynamic here, and what we've seen in these various strikes, whether it's West Virginia, Oklahoma, Arizona, elsewhere, is kind of something of a resuscitation of that older kind of tradition from a time which, really isn't that long ago. We're talking, say, the 60s and 70s, when labor in the public sector didn't have these rights, when membership in unions and in the labor movement in government employment was strictly voluntary, when these sorts of systems of collective bargaining that exist in places like where I live in New York and elsewhere didn't exist, and where workers had to make gains through collective action, which very often was illegal, including illegal strike activity. Right. So in that sense, the timing of these actions is very fortuitous. I think, and it also should be noted that in all, basically all these states where these strikes and protests have broken out, by and large, we're talking about states that are right to work, where collective bargaining rights for public sector employees are either very limited or more or less non-existent, and where politically speaking, organized labor is like fairly marginal and powerless, especially if you compare it to the situation in New York or Illinois or California or whatever the case may be. So in that sense, it's going to be very interesting to see what will happen here. We've seen these upsurges in states where public sector labor has been very weak for a long time. In states like New York, California, Illinois, where labor has, at least institutionally speaking, been much stronger and has higher rates of union membership and closer relationships with powerful politicians and what have you, once these supports, these legal institutional supports, get taken away, it's going to be very interesting to see whether that results in a reversion to collective action, whether we see more rank and file participation in militant struggles and movements, all the rest of it, or if it's just continued decline. I think it's way too early to know whether that's going to be the case, but it'll be very interesting to see how that all plays out.
Well, I think it's like so many of these other things, so many dynamics today. It's like even if you want moderation, you need militancy to even achieve that, if that's your goal. So that's that's very much the truth across the board. Not to say that I want moderation. Chris Maisano, contributing editor and writer for the Jacobin, member of Democratic Socialists of America, and a union activist. Chris, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks again for having me.
Of course. All right. Matt, are you ready? Do you know what I'm talking about? Well, I was actually thinking of the other one. Oh, no, you're right. Where the hell did I put this piece? We're going to listen to a little bit more of the Soviet national anthem. Okay, got it. You can keep playing it. So, there is a kidnapping regime implemented by this clown fascist oligarch nightmare administration of, you know, they are grotesque fucking morons, but it should be noted, I think we've said this before, like, it wasn't like the Nazis were also grotesque fucking morons.
Yeah.
Mussolini was a grotesque fucking, like, just because somebody is dumb and easy to make fun of and utterly loathsome and contemptible doesn't mean they aren't also dangerous snakes.
What matters is you believe in yourself.
What matters, like, whatever you do with passion. There's a lot going on in the world today, and it requires many things. It requires militancy. It requires expanded empathy. It requires clear-eyed strategic analysis. It requires solidarity. And one thing, though, that we can very comfortably say it does not require is the intervention of delusional multimillionaires in Westchester and elsewhere who really don't want to do anything to change anything, but I don't know, I guess find like fascism uncouth. And that is why a new group, SAM, which stands for Serving America, I believe, is launching.
The Serve America movement.
Serve America movement has been launched by a group led by one Morgan Stanley lawyer, with the idea of serving America. Now, you might say, are all of these people stepping forward to advocate a 90% tax on earnings above $500,000 a year? Are they saying we in the corporate sector finally recognize that we need Medicare for all? Or are they even saying we need to, let's do liberalism at its best. We need to rigorously protect the Constitution at all forms in today's world. And we also recognize that after the Republicans stole a Supreme Court seat, that obviously no more far-right extremists that will roll back women's rights and civil rights and totally destroy any hopes of the working class in any way, shape, or form. An unelected body should be held at least accountable to the old school norms. Well, if you're like me, you of course know that obviously they're not talking about any of that stuff. Their website, which is described as upbeat, mentions, quote, no specifics on immigration, reproductive rights, or the healthcare system, but it can clear up big questions, such as applying America's innovative spirit, a strong, clear-eyed, value-based leader, and the vitality of local communities. They're polling in Kansas. They're getting money from a handful of really rich, delusional people. And they're supporting former Syracuse Mayor Stephanie Miner, who says, let's have a civil dialogue. Barf. Yawn. Disgust. All. You can, in fact, serve America from the motherfucking gulag. Everybody involved in that project sentenced, and the only way to get out of it would be to immediately write a public apology, call for a federal jobs guarantee, a massive program of public works and nationalization to reverse greenhouse gas emissions, and to become Brooks Brother level patrons.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say a significant amount of the money you have in your bank account.
Yes, should go to this show, as well as Matt's Literary Hangover, and also Lush Left with David Slavic.
It's not a good sign if you have to put movement in the name of your movement.
What's amazing about delusional plutocrats is they actually really do have movement envy. Like, it's so funny because, like, people on the left who are serious, you know, like, spend a lot of time trying to really think about, like, how can we do this better? Like, what, you know, how does this work? What are we getting right? What are we getting wrong? And these, like, assholes are just, they actually are really, they're like, you know, there's something about these people that are just, like, fighting for the bare necessities of existence. I want some of that. Of course, without, obviously, I don't want to address any of the conditions. Guys, You have a president right now. His name is Macron, and he's incredibly unpopular. Shut up. Jesus Christ. Matt, are you ready again? We're going to flow right into it's not even a new segment anymore. It's just part of the regular TMBS diet, along, I believe, with pronouncing your name correctly.
Which is a great development.
It's a great development. Now I've got to figure out how to pronounce the most important socialist in America's name correctly. I will be working on that during the break music before Bree sits down. I was on vacation when she won, so I didn't. And I was trying so hard. Like, I was kind of news fasting. And I was like, all right, I'm going to see if Cortez won. Because, like, you know, if she lost, it sucks, but it wouldn't shock me. And if she wins, that's fucking great news. And so I caught it. And then the next day, I caught the Kennedy thing. Yeah, it didn't last. But that was great. Okay, now, Matt, are you ready? We have a breaking. This is David Griscom's. It's going to be very awkward when Richard Wolff is on the show, I have to say. This is David's sort of almost Oedipal desire to displace Richard Wolff. An aggressive move to become the leading Marxist economic authority.
We're going to need a whole new segment.
There are going to be Freudian segments in the future as this show grows. Now we have the economic update with David Griscom, a radical perspective on the world's economy.
Yeah, so just a quick note.
Let the music ride for a second, David. Did you just fuck up the shot before your segment? Is there a problem, guys?
That camera's not.
Is there a problem, guys?
No, it's all good.
We're all good?
We're fine,
okay, all right. Fine. David, go ahead. Take it away.
So quick note, in the last segment, I just wanted to correct something because I misspoke.
You mean from Economic Update 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, from 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
I accidentally said that you can't have negative interest rates. I was just going too quickly, and what I meant was that it would not be conducive to our current situation. But yes, you can have negative interest rates, and if anyone is interested in that, drop me a line on Twitter or email or whatever, and I will explain those to you. But to the economic update.
I'll explain those to you. Look at the balls on Grisco. Yeah, this really is the Brocialist show. Yeah, if you have any questions about that, you just fucking hit me on Twitter, dude.
If you didn't get that and need some further, I have office hours, bro.
Yeah, I have office hours.
That will be the day.
I love it. All right, keep going.
Yeah, so I wanted to turn my attention to the stock market this week. And we got to remember when we're talking about the stock market that it's not really the best way to measure the economy. It's much better to think of it more as a barometer for the feelings of the rich and powerful.
Yes.
But anyways, there has been some interesting developments. So the stock market has been, doing fairly well, but not great over the past couple of months. And primarily the reason for this is that companies have enacted $433.6 billion in share repurchases during the last quarter, which broke the record of quarter one, which is the historical record of $242.1 billion. So it's a significant increase in corporations buying their own stock from investors. During this time, investors have been selling their stock like crazy. So the headline basically is, the only thing that's keeping the stock market afloat right now are these huge corporate buybacks.
Companies buying their own stocks back.
And why do companies buy their own stock? There's a few reasons behind it. One of them is that companies right now have huge cash reserves. Mm-hmm. And if you don't want to have cash reserves, and these companies are refusing to use that cash reserve to increase wages for workers, to invest into their companies. So they say, well, what can we do with it? Well, we had to buy our own stock. And it also inflates your own stock. So you would typically buy your own. Which
is good for the shareholders.
Yeah, which is good for the shareholders, and especially CEOs and certain characters who have, the stock prices as part of their packages. But this is an interesting phenomenon because what we're seeing right now is the Trump tax cuts and the era of cheap money from low interest rates at the Federal Reserve has created this kind of artificial situation where the stock market actually, under different circumstances, might be doing pretty poorly because a lot of investors are quite shy about investing into this market, knowing that Trump is engaging in these pretty wild trade wars.
Pretty wild.
So right now we're seeing these indicators that the stock market and the economy are doing
It's wild.
okay.
It's what I want to do to my daughter. That's wild.
That is wild.
That's super wild. Talk about non-edible.
Go full circle.
What if you want to kill your sons and fuck your daughter?
Freud's an idiot. Freud doesn't understand
totally
the
wrong.
drive.
Bad theory. How about I want to kill my sons and fuck my daughter? Didn't account for that. The Greeks are so stupid.
But just to wrap it up and to think about this clearly, what I'm worried about is that we had this era of cheap money. We also had this huge influx of cash from the Trump administration's ridiculous tax cuts. None of the gains of the economy have gone to the working class, and we now see people whose wages have been stagnant, and we're even seeing some early signs of inflation. It's a pretty frightening situation for the working class, and the artificial prop-ups that we sort of have, or artificial might be too harsh, but the kind of prop-ups that we have in our economy right now that are making it seem like it's okay, could be pulled away very quickly if we fall into recession. And I'm starting to become very worried that if we do see a recession, that given the amount of company debt, which has just broke $6.3 trillion in debt from U.S. corporations, that we don't have a strong enough fundamentals in our economy to be able to survive another recession, and we could see a very deep slide akin to a 2008 if there is some kind of slump.
Yeah, but don't worry. And this is, by the way, this is the difference. Bhaskar Sunkara talks about the Finland station as the example of the revolutionary emancipatory spirit that wants to democratize all of human life and let people truly actually fulfill their potential and govern their lives individually and collectively. Then there's the Singapore model, which is anti-democratic, elitist, corporatist, but does have a certain managerial competence and a shallow but at times effective certain type of multiculturalism. And then there's Hungary Station, which in a modern context is the resurgent global proto-fascism from Trump to Orban to Modi and Putin. And point being, in 2008, we had the Singapore model. You deregulate and, capitalist dynamics generally, even with a regulated Wall Street, will at times lead to a crisis, even the most well-regulated scenario. And of course, Wall Street melted down the global economy, eliminated vast amounts of wealth, and then the managers and technocrats came in with a fix, which of course rewarded and reinforced oligarchy and Wall Street, but was effective enough to artificially protect the container and keep things going. Now you have a government. Now in the Trump mold, you don't have that expertise. You have just morons and bandit types who have no idea what the hell they're doing and are just, riding the wave for their own self-interest. And that is an important distinction to note.
And we have an economy that's very fundamentally weak because of it.
Right.
And it's a quite worrying development.
Indeed. And that is the Grishcom Economic Minute. It's coming for you, Richard Wolff.
I love Richard Wolff. I want that to be. You're gonna meet him on the street at Cooney.
Yeah, he's like, "Hi, this is Dr. Richard Wolff. Apparently, there's some little prick on a new YouTube show that's trying to talk about Marxist economics. Do I have to go over there and smack you in the face?" No, Richard. I mean, we're just. I think Brie's just running a minute late, which is very, very unusual of Brie. Brie is much more of a 15 minutes early type of gal. But as we vamp for a second, guys like Richard Wolff and David Harvey, and I guess I put Angela Davis. I mean, there's like a handful of elders. I mean, obviously Bernie and Jeremy Corbyn on an electoral level. I arguably, I would say Andres Lopez Obrador, AMLO, these people who sort of, in their different ways, kept the flame for things. I mean, one of the most positive things about this moment is Richard Wolff has like a vastly popular podcast,
It's
right?
pretty
I mean,
incredible.
it sounds small, but that actually is a very important cultural shift.
And historically, like, weird, right? Like, I mean, I'd be curious to see sort of underground sort of literatures and Marx like on the left and how that really worked, pre-internet, because it's hard to really even imagine that at this point.
Right.
But I mean, thousands of people checking out a podcast. I don't know how you would compete with that dissemination earlier.
Well, it's funny. It's
No.
like, a lot of these older Marxist publications that survived in the U.S., like, for example, Monthly Review, which is still, pretty decent. And, Paul Sweezy and a lot of folks there wrote really great books, really incredible economic thinkers to check out. But it's always funny when you talk to some of the old timers who were around for those times. And these small publications had, decent circulation. But because it was so, like, insulated of a community, these small personal feuds would take down like entire publications.
Luckily, that's all behind us now.
Oh yeah, the left doesn't do small personal feuds and
No, we excel
dumb
at it.
internal. Well, what is that? What is the psychology and the paradox that a political project that aims to be for the many and not the few, and synchronize and create solidarity as between literally all categories of human, then in its own scenes endlessly bifurcates, dissects, looks, and even there is a hard balance, because on one hand it's like, guys, just shut the fuck up and get on with it and go to army, go to the war with the army you have, and like, don't worry about all this nonsense. Have a little more charity with each other. And then on the other hand, there are times where it's like, no, that actually is an important, we got to iron it out. But why is the left so adept at circular firing squads?
I don't know that I think it might be part of the process. I'm still on the fence on all this. Like, I come down on.
Can somebody let Bree in? She is here.
Yeah, you want. Like, I come down on a certain side of a lot of these arguments. Particularly when it comes to comedy and free speech and things like that.
Right.
But I also think that these sorts of arguments, it's the narcissism of small differences, right? Like,
Right.
And then there's a certain phenomenon, especially on the left, where you become wise to something regardless of what it is. And like 3 weeks later, you see someone else who isn't up on that.
Right.
And you just want to lash out at them, like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And you don't realize, like, oh, I just came around on this myself anyway.
You didn't get this before,
and you think
Matt.
it's actually
what the
them.
fuck is wrong with you?
You think it's.
I thought of the same thing about 3 months ago.
Yeah, and you see it like, well, if you didn't come around on this earlier, are you really one of us? Are you a comrade? And things like that. And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, there's things that are very particular to this time that are annoying, and a lot of it is just like campus culture transferred onto like actual politics, which is a problem. But then there is also just the history. I mean, it's a fucking argumentative group of people that have always had a lot of beefs, and sometimes it's historic and philosophically and practically important, and in other times it looks like just a bunch of crazy people arguing about unnecessary nonsense and missing really important historical moments where they needed to actually be on point.
I also think when you're not exercising power, you have more time to abstract.
Right. You have more time. Right. All right. We're going to exercise some power now, and we're going to take a brief break. And first, Bree, you're going to come on. We're going to do like 15 minutes, and then Jake is going to join us. So let's just take like a 20, 30-second break and get you set up. From The Intercept and, of course, crew on the Michael Brooks Show. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I've been gone so long, the whole studio has changed, and I wasn't notified.
I thought you were in D.C. We went and had dinner, and we talked about all the things that were happening, and you were like, yeah, I'm going to D.C. And then I was like, oh, it's been a while. I need to have Bree back for her spot in the rotation. But, like, I was like, I guess, why don't you do a call-in? And you're like, what's the matter? Am I getting downgraded? And I was like, no, I thought you were in D.C.
That's exactly what I said, but maybe not in that voice.
That's just how I hear the woman voice.
You're so good at impressions ordinarily, Michael.
Well, there's like impressions writ large, and then there's the man voice, which is like, hey, like, you want to call in at 7:20? That's me. And then there's the girl voice, which is like, I got downgraded.
What's the woman voice, Michael?
Same shit. So let's talk about, all right, first of all, Alexandria
Ocasio-Cortez. Correct.
She was the only piece of, well, I mean, people could have, I had actually there was some nice news like in my life, but on the national level, and I'm, I'm globally oriented, so I'm happy about AMLO.
What's your good news?
Oh, nothing. I can't. It's not for public consumption.
I want to share in your happiness.
I appreciate my life. I'm glad. No, honestly, I'm very. It is
the one that matters is me. I'm the only one that matters.
No, I'm like, no, I can't. My sister had some good news that I shouldn't like. It's it's her own thing, but I'm very happy about it. I'm very close to my sister, and everybody's in good health and so on. So
That's
I
wonderful.
always appreciate that. But her getting elected was the best thing that happened politically. Now, the same people that were telling me that Bernie Sanders was like the leader of like the delicatessen wing of the Ku Klux Klan are now telling me that like they're the real socialists because they like Cardi B, and somehow and I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Why did she win? What's the actual reason that this woman pulled off this, like, I don't want to say shocking. It was legit surprising.
No, it was legit surprising because even those of us who had been following her campaign for longer than the morning of the campaign, like the majority of mainstream news outlets, it always was perceived to be a long shot, if only because it's always a long shot when you're going up against a 10-time incumbent who is one of the most powerful Democrats in the House and who has in Queens and in Queens, king of the Queens machine, and who has fundraised her by like a factor of 10 to 1. I mean, those are the kind of rubrics that we always historically look to see whether or not someone's going to come from behind. But what he didn't do and what people didn't anticipate is that she was able to both personally hustle her butt off. She tweeted recently that picture of her first pair of shoes from the campaign with holes literally worn through the soles. But more interestingly, The Intercept published an article over the weekend which analyzed the demographic data. So the story that's been prevalent in the media is that, oh, this is a demographic story. She's Latina. She's in a district that is largely black and brown. It's become increasingly black and brown. And this was simply a tipping point, and she was able to cinch the victory. But that's not what the numbers show at all. The numbers show that some of her strongest districts are actually the most gentrified districts. Right. And what actually happened based on the numbers seems to be that she was able to mobilize the Justice Democrats and the other Bernie groups that supported her, and they were able to be a ground force that was able to knock doors.
And the DSA as well.
And the DSA, absolutely.
It's that socialist, progressive, united front that's necessary.
Right. So that's why, and not only that, not only were they able to get the feet on the ground and people knocking on doors, but they were able to present people with a progressive platform that spoke directly to the needs, the material needs of the community. She didn't back away from difficult issues. She didn't equivocate. She looked people in the eye and she told them that I believe that in America, the wealthiest country in the world, that every person should be able to live with dignity. Nobody should be too poor to survive. And if you can't win on that, you can't win on anything.
Yeah, the fact that people should actually have abundance, and that, socialism actually does mean clawing back some of and decommodifying some of the economy, which is what I would say to the extent these distinctions matter. And hopefully we will get to a point where they will matter because there will be actual governance. That is a distinction among many between a progressive and a socialist perspective. It's not just the essential work of provisioning public good, which we can all agree on, but actually the really recognition that some sectors of the economy cannot be under a market logic. And she held to that pretty strongly.
She really did. And, Joe Crowley, he did shift to the left on a lot after she entered the race. And I think that, more centrist candidates to do that should be applauded. That's kind of what we want, right? Like there aren't enough
But we should still take the real thing when we have the opportunity.
Absolutely. But I do want to give credit to that because, you know, the reality is there are only so many socialist candidates that are even challenging incumbents this year. But I think the difference that's important to note is that for all of the centrists who are now looking around saying, oh, gosh, what do we do now? Let's try to analyze all these little piecemeal parts of what Ocasio-Cortez has done and try to adopt them for ourselves. It's always going to seem like a shoddy version of the real thing if it's not coming from some central core belief. And when people say, I wrote a piece on this last weekend in The Intercept, and I quote someone who describes Bernie Sanders as kind of pedantically talking about billionaires all the time and tries to distinguish Ocasio-Cortez because she doesn't pedantically talk about billionaires all the time.
She also, if I can quote, the author also said, I just have to quote because you really did manage to find maybe the most ridiculous piece. Who was the author? It was you wrote New York
Wallace Wells?
Who?
Wallace Wells was one.
New York Magazine. The Sanders movement has sometimes seemed. I am quoting from your piece, quoting him.
Frank Rich. The New York Mag one is Frank Rich.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Oh no, then this is Wells because you haven't gotten to Frank Rich yet. The Sanders movement has become sometimes as pedantic and single-minded as its hero, fixated on the influence of billionaires. And she was distinguished by, as an example, she traveled to a Texas tent where migrant children are being held. That's extremely important, and everybody should do that. I don't necessarily see how that contradicts being opposed to plutocracy.
Or that Sanders was just in California at Disneyland, for instance, advocating on behalf of labor interests there and workers who aren't getting a minimum. I mean,
but here's one thing, and even this one, I'm actually going to question. She also dressed in white. Which is another major distinction. Although I have to say, I've seen Bernie actually wear white shirts.
Look, we're team white shirt progressives right now.
Well, this is the new uniform of the DSA.
I feel like I missed this email.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to hold that against you when you come to that recognition and wear white in 3 weeks.
Well, you two are on Team Summer here, which I also support.
Respect. So you're part of the solution. So it seems to me that there's kind of two general responses to her. I just want to weave into what you're already saying. One is this is all demographic, and this just reinforces it. Actually, okay, this is the specific thing. There's two essentialist racial positions in the Democratic mainstream right now, and it's amazing because they're the inverse of each other, and they're both really problematic. And one is, the pseudo-woke Hillary shit. It's just because she's a woman of color. It's because she talks to Vogue. That's it. It has nothing to do with any substance. Not even the way she actually very effectively weaved these things together in her campaign, which is totally essentialist and actually unbelievably condescending of voters of color, incidentally. Mm-hmm. And then the flip side is someone like Tammy Duckworth saying this won't fly in Illinois, which is essentialist and racist in the other direction because I don't know what you mean by Illinois. I think this would do pretty well in Chicago. And number two, a lot of these programs like Medicare for All and Federal Jobs Guarantee are popular across the board. So are you literally just talking of the ethnicity of someone representing these ideas?
Yeah. I feel like there's a kind of proselytizing to centrist or liberal whites. That is an effort to convince them that poor whites are irrational and can never like anything that they are interested in. That's who she's speaking to. She's saying to all the quote unquote good liberal white people, oh, don't bother with this because the deplorables in the Midwest just won't get it. They're too racist. So you shouldn't even get behind these policies that obviously benefit you. You know what I mean? That was incredibly disappointing. And moreover, it ignores the fact that we have some kind of evidence that those kind of policies do have a lot of traction. When you look at the incredible popularity of Bernie Sanders in those very states that she's referring to in the Democratic primary.
Like literally the places she said this is going to doom us was like it could serve just as easily as a map of Bernie Sanders' primary victories.
And it always reminds me of I heard Ben Jealous, who also had a really great victory.
Yeah, Ben Jealous is no, we should be celebrating Ben Jealous, and I hope that's going to be a real uphill battle. But I mean, he has a great platform.
Yeah, I think he's great, and I hope that we do some more coverage of him soon at The Intercept.
Yeah,
but I remember him saying about being a Bernie surrogate and traveling around with him in 2016, that he was very familiar with Bernie's stump speech, and he recalls the first time that he took that stump speech to a part of the country with an all-white audience, the stereotypical white working class, blue-collar audience. And he knew that there was a part of the speech where he built up to talking about Black Lives Matter, right. And we're here for $15 minimum wage, and we're here for universal health care, and we're here for Black Lives Matter. And Ben Jealous says he remembers tensing up, wondering how this audience that had been cheering, enthusiastically for every other part of his speech was going to react when they got to that part. And lo and behold, people hollered and stood on their chairs and fist bumped and said, yeah, we're on board with all of it. There was not a moment of hesitation. And he reflected on that as, a real indication of how separate the reality on the ground is from what the media presents as what voters will and will not tolerate. Because the media has this image of voters as single issue voters, and that there's, if any single issue in the cohort of a progressive program is somehow not directly targeted to you, then the racist white working class is going to torpedo the whole effort. And maybe that's what they think that way because that's sometimes how the left treats issues, right? Like there's a way in which, not the left, I mean like liberals, sorry, that the liberals treat issues where they say, they looked at Bernie Sanders and said, he didn't talk about race in the way that I wanted to, so I'm going to completely ignore all these policy prescriptions that are obviously enormously beneficial to people of color. But that's just not the reality of how it is for working people.
Regulating Wall Street won't end racism. I mean, that really was. And I'm somebody who doesn't, I'm burned out and critical of constantly bringing up Hillary Clinton and relitigating her, unless it's just for comedy and that's fun. But that line in the debate can stand the test of time as the platonic representation of a profoundly dangerous, delusional, and I guess at best disingenuous worldview. I want to just add to what you're saying briefly, because I think that I have no problem holding two positions at once, which is that I think that, I'll make a really simple stat. Whatever the amount of Republicans, which I think is about 60%, that support these family separation policies, they're gone. Now, it doesn't mean that there's no asshole exemption. Everybody gets health care, even if you're a terrible person, certainly. Right? Obviously, there's no moral means testing. So I have no problem with people taking a really good and serious look at the Republican Party writ large and being serious about things like strategic white supremacy, which is what everything from voter suppression to these immigration policies are. It's creating your voter base and indulging in ancient racism and xenophobia, which of course is traditional to this country. The two problems that we need to keep hitting, though, is first of all, this is not about the white working class. It's about white suburbia. If you want to ethnotize it, it is about white suburbia. The median income of the Trump voter is upwards of $70,000 a year, and it's an affluent Republican base that absolutely has always been successfully appealed to on racial appeals, even if they were more subtle by Reagan or Mitt Romney. And that, I mean, that's actually really and that number two, to the extent that there are these people that were hustled by his lie in the industrial Midwest, and even if that's only 30,000 people, well, that 30,000 people really matters, and why would you not want them back without any appeals for a split second to any racism, xenophobia, or any of that? Full stop. But if they were caught in the hustle and they could come back, why wouldn't you? This is politics. This isn't
That's literally
fucking
your job.
party.
If you don't want to talk to racists, if you don't want to solicit the votes of racists, you probably shouldn't be a politician, because there's a heck of a lot of them in every party in this country, in every neighborhood in this country, in every ethnic group in this country. It's just the way that it is.
Right.
And you can't sit around, if you want to be the leader of the free world, you can't sit around and say, it's not my job to care about the fate of this cohort of my constituency. If that's how you feel about things, go be the mayor of a small town where you go ahead and duck goose everybody and vet whether or not they actually are meritorious of living in your jurisdiction. But the president of the country can't do that. And you have to have a more humanistic orientation where you actually deign to care about the people that you have control over their lives. And Ocasio-Cortez spoke repeatedly and passionately about human dignity. She uses that word with purpose. And that, I think, is part of why her message was so unimpeachable. You can't do anything when someone looks you in your eye and makes a basic call for dignity. That's the lesson that the Democrats should be taking away from this. They probably won't.
Well, what's so amazing to me, and then we're going to bring Jake Flores in a minute, but what's so amazing to me is just the you know, I have a lot more time because I'm very dispositional, I realize. Like Maxine Waters, I love Maxine Waters. I don't care that she said a whole bunch of stuff about Russia that I might not necessarily agree with. I like her attitude, and I like that she brings it. And that, to me, is very much like, you know, I like Lula, I like Maxine. I like people who get in it. Now, the inability to simultaneously say, you can't be a perfectionist if you're trying to make a national campaign. We need to have compassion and empathy even for people that might hold ridiculous, loathsome beliefs, or even just more gently silly beliefs, ignorant beliefs, you know, to people who aren't really gone. And then actually, again, recognizing that there are people that, like, they're outside of that circle right now. And it doesn't like that, and they got to be battled. They got to be fought. I mean, the fact that there are some people who simultaneously can tweet like, I don't, you know, if you voted for Trump, I hope you get a hurricane, and then the next week be like, you know, not serving Sarah Sanders is really uncivil, is the synthesis of the most it is this perfectionistic lack of reality dealing combined with this pedantic nerdery that actually doesn't allow you to recognize the very real forces in American society that need to be confronted and defeated.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. I you know, to that point also, I think there are Ocasio-Cortez detractors on the internet who've been saying things like the real reason she won is that only 11% of people turned out, et cetera, et cetera. What is the true fact is that turnout was up 68%, I believe. 68%. And how do you get that to happen? Part of it is mobilizing people on the ground, and part of that is giving people a message that makes them feel like if they bother to come out of their house and vote, they might actually be able to make a difference in their lives. It's just that simple. But it's a two-parter, and getting her, you know, list of vote, you know, her whatever list of phone numbers or whatever it is that the DNC was so frenetically trying to get from Bernie Sanders,
Bernie, right?
Like that's not going to cut it. You can call those people
you get
in
my
order
list,
to get
but
them.
You won't get my style, motherfucker.
I mean, exactly. So we'll see what people do with this, because I have been heartened by the fact that so many people are hopping on the Ocasio-Cortez bandwagon. People feel like there's some magic and some energy there, whether or not it's superficial. It makes them more willing to consider the idea of socialism. I read somewhere that socialism was like the #1 Googled term or something like that on Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, what have you. And, you know, you've got the, you know, MSNBC or CNN or whatever it was with like a 5-minute explainer on
they did a Democratic socialism explainer, yeah.
You know, like
on MSNBC.
That's incredibly powerful. The day before she was actually elected, you know, a socialist writer who writes for Vogue did a profile on her in which she got Vogue readers to sit down and read an entire paragraph, 200-word paragraph, where Ocasio-Cortez explains her socialist ideals. That's huge. I tweeted at the time, even if that's it, she already won.
Absolutely.
And the sea change that we've seen in the past week is very heartening, and I hope it goes a long way to desensitizing some of the people who have these chips on their shoulder about Bernie Sanders because they didn't like the way that he presented.
And the final thing I have to say, and you've written about this too, though, it also cannot be used. Like, look, I criticized Bernie this past week, not on this show because I was on vacation, but I was, you know, tweeted or something, noted like, yeah, I think his response so far on ICE has been morally insufficient and actually just politically wrongheaded. But this should not be used as a cudgel to beat Bernie Sanders. And I find I'll just go back to the old thing. This nice old Jewish guy that wants you to have health care. What an asshole. The obsession with him is a form of like psychosis at this point. And he is happy about her winning. She worked for his campaign. They represent very, very similar and synchronized values.
She literally tweeted Bernie Sanders plus Cardi B equals Ocasio-Cortez. Like, and people nevertheless are out here writing these articles distinguishing them on the basis of the fact that she wears white and was interviewed by Vogue.
Right.
That's literally the argument in the New Yorker.
Nothing essentialist about that. All right. Jake Flores, please come to the stage. This is our new triple shot we're doing here. Jake, you can throw on those headphones in case we play sounds, and we're going to take calls in the post game. Jake Flores, host of one of the best named pods in the game, Pod Damn America. And is the shot all good, guys?
I can hear myself, I think.
Yeah, you're good to go.
Cool.
So, I mean, I know you're probably sick of telling the story at this point, but you got to, give us the ICE story. And then I have a concept which fuses the ICE story and the name of your podcast. You would be open to hearing that idea after you tell that story.
I love it. And yeah, I've told the story a million times, but that's my
But
life.
it's still like, I should emphasize, it's a terrifying, like, this is a very important story for people to know. I mean, we can, I mean, in some ways it is like entertaining and people have heard it and whatever, but it's incredibly fucked up.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to tell the story after it happened is because it's entertaining and also it's both at the same time. There is some truth to be gleaned from what happened and most importantly how they explained to me why they were doing what they were doing, but I'll get to that. But for anyone,
just take it from the beginning. Pretend this is the first time you're ever telling it.
Here we go. For anyone uninitiated, here's the story. So I'm a comedian, and I'm an extremely online millennial, and I use social media as a bit of a scratch pad to work out material. Yeah,
we should EOM it now.
And it was Cinco de Mayo, and also another important thing to understand where I'm coming from with this story is that I'm half Mexican, so I have a mixed family, right? I'm from Texas. My dad's Mexican. My mom's white. So I think that gives me a little bit of a perspective on both sides of certain issues, and I'm also a leftist and sort of understand, I think certain ways that identity politics and cultural politics get used to sort of gaslight you away from, any direct political action,
right?
Anything of any actual value. Like we saw that recently, in 2016, it really just it got weaponized and they got split and pitted against each other, right? So this is a way that I
What
think.
about my lived experience as a woman, Bernie?
Yeah.
It's not supporting coups in Honduras will not honor my lived experience.
Yeah. I mean, what is silly.
All that type of
two
stuff.
things against each other,
Right, right.
So I was thinking about this concept of cultural appropriation because every year on Cinco de Mayo and Dia de los Muertos, there's these sort of clickbaity articles that are designed to make you outraged.
They're
right?
just like, and if you go to that party, and if you do that, and if you, that's internet outrage girl voice.
Yeah.
Okay, couple of things.
Yeah.
Cinco de Mayo, blah, 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 list, blah, blah, blah. That type of stuff.
Yeah, there's these BuzzFeed videos that get made that are designed to shame you and scorn you. And I think the thing that's ironic about them is that they get the most clicks probably from white people because it's really like it's going off of white guilt.
No, it's the white guilt style guide.
Yeah, it's for a white person to then share and go like, look, what we've been doing.
I'm not gonna go to
the internet makes people demented. So I was thinking about that, and I do think cultural appropriation on some level, like identity politics in general, has some merit to it, but because we've reached this cataclysm where it's now one or the other, it's kind of emblematic of the worst people in the political realm, like the people that scream about that loudest. And I also think, and this is where I started to get into where I was writing this joke, it's just really funny that we're still talking about this while ICE just becomes more and more like militarized, and they turn into this.
We're literally
Gestapo.
having like a ethnic cleansing of people who are primarily Hispanic type scenario, while these same people are still like, that was a really inappropriate sample to use in that 90s song you liked. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's
new
as if,
article.
You know, during like the Holocaust, someone was, telling, you shouldn't wear this type of shirt, you know.
Oh, dude, that is such a good bit.
It's just so weird.
Literally creating like the ghettos, and it's just like, wearing a kippah is like not appropriate. Like that's not your identity.
Yeah, it's like someone
German
gunned
BuzzFeed.
down next to you.
German BuzzFeed. So, protesting Hitler is really uncivil, but
so that's the basic kind of premise of this joke, right? So but jokes, the premise comes through in subtext. It's not literal. All right. I hate that I have to explain jokes, but I'm on a tour of the country right now. So jokes are about subtext. They're not literal. It's weird that I have to explain this, but here we are.
Matt, can I have my board, please?
Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining.
So the joke was, it was Cinco de Mayo, and I went, hey, you know what? Everyone's talking about cultural appropriation, but ICE exists.
Right.
What if we solve both problems at the same time? I think we should just let people do cultural appropriation if they just fight ICE, like physically fight ICE. You know, like kill an ICE
you
agent.
clearly have talked to some lawyers since the first iteration of the joke. You're like, in a satiric sense.
No, I haven't. What happened is I went on tour and I've worked the bit out, and it works better if I talk up to it, because then when I get to the part where you kill the ICE agent, it has more of a punch. Believe me, I'm not taking any of that back. So the joke was like, yo, we should just let people do cultural appropriation if they kill an ICE agent. Like, for example, if you like kill an ICE agent, you should be allowed to wear a sombrero, you know?
I would say that would be a pretty basic courtesy.
Like, and you would be allowed to wear it because everyone would know, like, that person killed, like, you know, no one could
I think not only would you would be, like, very popular.
Right, and if anyone came up to you...
you would be, like, it at that.
If anyone came up to you with a camera and they were like, oh, I'm going to catch this guy doing cultural appropriation, everyone would be like, no, he's cool.
No.
He's cool, because he's also crazy. Like, you don't want to mess with that person.
Yeah,
right?
right.
It's like the white guy that shot George Zimmerman.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever.
Don't put me in your BuzzFeed video.
So then the joke kind of goes like, I'm doing the stand-up version of it because I worked out the kinks since then. But like, the joke's kind of like, at that point, you've already committed yourself to this life of murder. Why don't you keep going? Let's say, let's say the more ICE agents you kill, the more racist the shit you're allowed to do gets. So, like, let's say you kill 3, 4, 5 more ICE agents. Now you get a poncho to match the sombrero, right? So you're building an outfit. The more
that's actually when you build that wall. Build that wall.
And the joke is kind of like, really think about it, because if you killed like 20, like if you're waging this one-person war against ICE. It doesn't matter how racist you kind of are just in person. You've just banked so much karma in the other direction. Who cares,
Well, I think what you're doing is you're really making a structural versus performative argument.
That's why it's so funny that the thing about comedians is that comedians never get in trouble for what the joke was actually about. Because what I was actually making fun of was liberals and BuzzFeed, but BuzzFeed didn't come kick down my door. The government did. But I was making fun of them for having the wrong priorities in the fight against, racism.
And this should just note for all potential fascist, racist, ethnic cleansing agencies watching, as well as for potentially, I would assume not on this show, but I know these videos traveled around. There was at least one, maybe the dumbest person I've ever heard in my life, who called in the Majority Report with the perspective that the joke still was violent. So just to be clear to all of you people, it's a joke. These are all jokes. Satire. Satire primarily actually aimed at wuss bag latte liberals, actually.
Yeah, it's not that hard.
Them and fascists. There's really nothing to complain
the
about.
Fascists weren't even the prime target of the joke.
The start of the joke already assumes that you also don't like fascists. That's like where we're going. The twist is jokes are about subtext, okay? Why does a chicken cross the road? You're not actually talking about chickens. You're talking about expectations, right? And also, I don't believe that people don't get that. people like jokes. People like entertainment. Like, there's a certain thing that people do against comedians where they willfully misunderstand the joke in order to just attack you.
I don't think it's just comedians, Bree. Do you?
Sure.
That people willfully misunderstand and not get what they're saying.
Well, I also
this is a pretty broad experience of today's media environment.
Like, if you work that into a drama script somehow, like somebody was killing ICE agents, that would just be allowed free speech.
That's
24.
That would be a cool new, like, Clive Owen movie or something.
But
like,
that's a
I'm
point.
going to kill another ICE agent, or I can't do Cinco de Mayo this year.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit, and I'll come back to how they found me. But that was a point that I made to Homeland Security when they came to my apartment, because they wanted to talk to me. And I said, you know, a joke is a work of fiction. What if I had written a novel about this? You wouldn't. What if I had made it like a prestige television show? It would be popular. Like, everyone gets fiction when it's presented a certain way, but because jokes are literally like, you know, they're so close to just being you saying a thing, no one treats them with any respect, you know. But anyway, I'll get back to that in a second. But so basically, this joke went out, right? I put it on Twitter and Facebook, and
it's a good joke.
And I'm since very proud of it. I've worked it into about a 15 minutes part of my act. It's the opener. It's got the whole story with the DHS and everything. It's been quite a boon. So thank you, Homeland Security, if you're watching, which I think you are. But
Patreon.com/TMBS. You have no idea the kind of jokes we're making in the post game.
It's a big long
members' privileges, guys.
It's a big long accordion style joke. It just keeps. It's one of those ones like that, like Louis would do or Patton Oswalt would do, where it's just like keeps going and going and going, and you're so uncomfortable the whole time. You're like, ah, you know. It works. I've been doing stand up for too long. I know how to do this. But. So I put out the basic first couple ideas of that joke online, and it worked as a tweet. Like, people thought it was funny. Yeah. No one got mad at me on the internet. Nothing happened. People that follow me kind of laughed at it. And then 9 a.m. the next day, I woke up extremely hungover to just banging on my door in the loft I live in. And I live in a loft that's like a kind of a punk building, like. Seamless can't find my apartment. Like, there's no numbers on the doors and stuff. So the fact that they found me that quickly is, it's very spooky.
Yeah.
And I think
Who did you think it was at your door?
Okay, so I live in this shitty building, and the pipes are all leaking and stuff. And one of my windows fell out. It's like it's horrible, right?
Jesus.
But there's this little repair guy that comes around sometimes, and he bangs on the door like a madman whenever he comes by, right? So I wake up delirious, I'm hungover, there's this banging on the door, and I go, oh, he's here to fix the window, right? So I go open it, and I expect to see the repair guy.
That sucks.
4 agents of Homeland Security holding badges saying, you know, Mulder and Scully or whatever. Yeah, 4.
4.
And like, why? And they weren't
half
even
Mexican.
There should have been 2 then. But they weren't like the big hot dog neck, like, you know, cop ICE guys with the guns and stuff. They were like detectives with cameras and stuff like that, right?
No.
And I think that they got
You're
me.
like, they send the pussies in the office out to do like, go check this comedian out.
Right. Yeah. well, I think that they probably didn't perceive me as that much of a threat, because in order to find me, they clearly had to look me up, and I'm a person who's very actively trying to get famous as a comedian. So, I'm a comedian. You should have just stopped there.
So maybe they thought, like, hey, you know what? Let's go to give this kid a favor.
Yeah, but now there's Barry, and maybe it confused people. The new HBO
I haven't
show.
seen that show.
Oh yeah. Oh, Barry's great.
Oh, cop it then.
But so just a side note, I don't think that so usually when people get in trouble online, right, what happens is another user like flags their tweet or post or whatever. I put it on Facebook and Twitter. It could have been either one. I'm not really sure.
Right.
But when that happens, the platform will take your post down because it's now a liability for them, right?
Right.
So that didn't happen to me. So I don't think that I got narked on by another user. I think I got pinged by an algorithm.
Yeah.
Like just the words "kill ICE agent" or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they came, and I opened the door, and I sort of gathered what was happening. Like as soon as they told me they were Homeland Security, I for some reason just put it together because I had like a friend who this happened to also.
Really?
Yeah. Well, Nick Mullen, famous online troll comedian. He's hilarious because he, says horrible things online, extremely ironically and stuff. He's the
co-host Cumtown, right?
He's the host of Cumtown,
and the founder of the DSA.
Also, the term "extremely online," you hear that get thrown around about people that are too addicted to the internet. That's comes from Nick Mullen. His Twitter handle when he was on Twitter was extremely online guy. That literally, he's the source of that. It's crazy. But so he's really funny because
I didn't know. So they came to him too.
So what happened to him is people cut. He says the craziest stuff online, but he gets in trouble for like the weird, innocuous tweets that are just like, "Oh, I'm getting a cup of coffee" or whatever. Like it's insane. So he had FBI visit him one time, and he thought, "Oh, it's got to be someone, some crazy internet person hates me, and they're swatting me or whatever." No, what happened was apparently he was talking to his uncle online about like ISIS or something, and his uncle was like, "Why does my nephew know the word caliphate?" Oh no, so clearly he's up to something. And he called the FBI.
What a
his own uncle, like by marriage, or
I don't know. I mean,
I hope by marriage.
Nick is from a trash can in Maryland. Like I'm not sure who spawned him or what's going on there.
He comes from the type of place where it's just like, what I want to know is why that boy knows so many Arabic words up there in New York City.
Yeah,
it's like more boring versions of swatting.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, it's essentially what his uncle did to him. But for me, I think I got pinged, right?
Yeah, so you got pinged. So these guys are at the door. You're hungover.
I'm like, and this is an important part of the story, is that there's something that these people are trained to do, which is to sort of, flashbang, like intimidate you, throw you off. And that works in a lot of instances because if you have kids or something, and you're like in your home and there's you're gonna freak out, right? And you're gonna be thrown off, and then they're gonna be able to sort of manipulate
you're sitting there like, you guys are either gonna kill me or make me famous,
dude. I literally
Let's do this.
was like, I'm a comedian, I can't take anything seriously. I still thought it was funny, even though I was like scared at the same time. I was like, this is how I die. This is the funniest shit ever,
right?
I'm also just like, I'm just feeling the hangover. I hate life. I'm like, whatever. I don't even really care that much about my own well-being. I don't have kids. I don't have pets. I have roommates, but they're just strange road comics that are just like sleeping, on like roll-out pads in rooms in this apartment. I don't take them away. I don't give a shit. I'm just trying to get rid of them anyway, We have nothing to lose. And so because I have nothing to lose, it throws off any intimidation that they're able to really throw at me. And also, I'm like, okay, if this becomes a thing, like, hey, my calendar's been empty all month. I need a thing,
Would this be your reaction to the same situation, Brie? Would you have some of the same sort of...
I'd call so many lawyers.
Right. I was going to say, Brie's lawyerness would kick in.
Yeah.
Yeah, as it should.
I mean, I had a friend whose husband was arrested drinking in New Orleans, just like randomly, like wasn't really causing that much of a problem, but he's a big guy and they just targeted him.
But New Orleans famously doesn't have open.
I know.
Yeah,
I know. That's why.
It's bizarre.
So I got this call at like midnight, and within like 15 minutes, we had a whole like legal defense team going on because as my boyfriend's a public defender, like it's just very easy.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, he had comics. I remember one time I was detained at the Israeli border going in from Jordan for like the day. They detained us. And, it wasn't like, it's sort of like on some level, like, the worst case scenario is they just turn you back to Amman. But they did put us through multiple interrogations. That is like literally what they did. And I remember the first round of interrogation, they had the setup actually where the person, standing directly in front of you, you're sitting asking the questions, and then a person, not exactly where you are actually, but more to the left, because it does like unsettle you, And in fact, the person in front of you is not talking to you. It's that person. So you get like, it's very weird visually, disjuncture between like listening to someone you can't really see, and then this person who was not saying a word is like boring down on you. Now, the guy to the left, though, who's asking me the questions, had like the most like he literally did sound like my like asshole impression of an Israeli person. So therefore, I could not understand a word he was saying. So he's just like, why is going from Jordan? So, but why Israel? And I remember at a certain point, I was just like, I looked at the person in front of me. I was like, guys, look, I can't understand what he's saying. So I get that this is like really terrifying and you whatever in the border, but like, if this is not like, if this is just to like fuck with me, you're succeeding. I'm uncomfortable. But if you want me to actually answer a question, you need to, like, someone who speaks in a way I can hear needs to do that.
They're trained in intimidation by David Lynch. Yeah. The guy's like talking backwards at you and shit.
No, it's just, and then it was great. It was like, I remember, yeah, exactly. And it was actually really funny. At the end, I'll speed through everything else and get back to you. But they finally, like at literally 7 or 8 hours, and they only gave us like a glass of water. It was really, and this is what they do. Like, they don't like Americans who are coming from Jordan. It's a dick border. And I remember like at one point they asked, my girlfriend at the time was studying Arabic in Amman, but she was actually like a Jewish princess from Long Island, and we were hitting that hard at a certain point, like Jewish, right? And so I'm back in for another interrogation. They're just like, if she's Jewish, why is she not studying Hebrew? But finally, at the end, this guy was like clearly in charge and didn't have like, he was, just like real Likud dude, right? He comes up and he's like, and it's like he's like, okay, like everything is done. And we'll know in an hour whether you go into the country or not. But, sorry, I know this is inconvenient. Let me get you some juice, blah, blah. And then at the end, he comes up to us an hour later. He kept his word. He's like, I have a good news and a bad news. And at this point, it's like, dude, like that was actually when I started to panic. I was like, what could be the bad news at this point? He's like, bad news, we waste your day. Good news, welcome to Israel. Asshole.
Wow. Oh, man.
Yeah. And then we went to...
he was like an old comedy writer.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like literally like an old, like fucking like Benny Hill, like the body of like a Sharon bodyguard.
Yeah, you got intimidated by Mort Saul.
And ever since then, I've always been really interested in what Hamas had to say. No, I'm just kidding. All right, go ahead. Satire.
So, yeah. Put a big asterisk next to everything we're all saying. But, so, they come to my door, and another thing is that I've been arrested quite a bit. Just, I don't know. I'm unlucky, or I'm, who knows. I'm outside a lot. I'm outside. I'm ethically ambiguous. I don't want to really try to claim that, but for some reason, I've been arrested quite a few times. I've been arrested for drinking a beer on my own porch before. Yeah, so I also like kind of know, like I'm not like, oh my God, what's jail gonna be like? I'm like, oh right, that thing again, So there's all these factors going into why I'm just like, all right, whatever.
Just totally ready to hang out with some gentlemen from Homeland Security.
They show up, and I'm not really. A lot of people say, "Oh, you got to hold up the Constitution and tell them your rights." Right? They don't give a shit about that stuff. Even if you're right.
Asshole libertarians are you?
Libertarians.
Like, well, what you gotta do is you show them the Constitution, say, and then they just leave.
Libertarians say that, and it's because it actually works for them because they're old white men.
Right, I was going to say, right.
Circular
like,
logic.
There isn't any speed limit according to Article 4.
But
right,
a lot of well-meaning,
you old prick.
Yeah. A lot of well-meaning activist types also, will tell you, oh, you should be prepared, for this sort of situation, etc. But I think the truth in that is that you should know your rights, but it's for court afterwards.
Right.
Like, don't be a hero.
When you chronicle all the ways in which they will violate your rights.
Yeah.
No later. Right.
So I kind of just was like, all right, let's do this. Like, let's talk about this because I have done nothing wrong. And
so you're just basically like,
hey, baby, put down that pipe and get my pipe up.
Just in terms of your enthusiasm, you're just ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I kind of just I can't remember if they came in or if I just went, all right, let's just do this. Like, next thing I know, we're walking into my apartment and something funny about my apartment is that I had this. I live in a loft, which is like an artist space, and I had this roommate who lived there forever, who was like really into like 9-inch nails and goth stuff, So she moved out, but there's just her stuff is still all over the walls. So there's all these mannequin parts with like gas masks on and stuff, and all this crazy shit. And
so you're really fitting the profile of like a bad guy.
So their main guy is talking to me, and the other 3 guys are walking around with cameras taking photos of all this goth stuff, all this corn video stuff, and I'm like, no, that's not. Don't put this in the case file. That's not why, Right. And so we start talking, and I get into the philosophical thing with him about the jokes work of fiction, etc. And he starts saying like, well, we may have gathered, but you still could be insightful. You don't know who might hear something you say and then go on and do something from there. And I'm like, at the time I had like, I don't know, like 15,000 Twitter followers or something, not very much. I can't get booked off of this. If I'm not getting booked as a comedian, and I'm not inciting anyone. They don't give me. They can't have it both ways, right? But the other
that was very Israeli of you, actually. I'm not getting booked. I'm not inciting. It's biologic.
But the other thing he said, or the other thing I told him was like, if you're concerned with people inciting violence, like why aren't you going and bugging like Alex Jones and Roseanne Barr? Right. Roseanne Barr is an active Pizzagator. I work at a restaurant that gets death threats over Pizzagate all the time. It's a restaurant that serves pizza. It's not even the one from Pizzagate. That's how much of a thing Pizzagate is.
Wow.
Is that real?
Yeah, it's real.
True?
It's like
Pizzagate is real.
No. You're receiving these death threats of some unrelated pizza joint.
Yeah. My friend who works there, who answers the phones, tells me, about 9 out of 10 sound like there's just some person messing with you. But
I don't know. David's really serious about it. I don't know what to say.
I thought your voice sounded familiar, David.
Satire.
Yeah, that's a good tag for
I think that's a new tag for everything.
Satire.
Get t-shirts made.
So you're breaking it down with them.
Yeah, and so oddly, I don't know what's going on here. You'll never know whether they're playing 4D chess to draw more information out of me, or they're just some idiots that have a job and
probably
an
both,
assignment.
Right?
Yeah, I don't know. I think kind of both at the same time. Yeah. So they start saying like, we start having this conversation, and after a while they sort of sat down, and and it seems to be winding to a close, and I'm just like, I think these people might be about to leave. Like, okay. And so they ask me, they're like, we need to our job is to make sure you're not a terrorist, And there's, so they're like, what do you believe in? Like, what you don't like ICE? That's, clear. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. I don't like ICE. I'm not a fan. And they're like, but what do you think should be done? Like, what is your answer to the problem? ICE. And I go, look,
that is
you're asking for suggestions.
No, that's some Joe. No, I mean, I interpret that as straight
platform.
Joe McCarthy shit. That is literally like identifying subversives. I mean, I'm not to like put a negative feeling on it, but I mean,
there's plenty of negative feelings.
Yeah, I was gonna no, I mean, obviously, but I'm just saying, like, I don't interpret.
Don't ruin his experience, Michael.
Sorry, man.
Don't ruin my experience as a woman.
I actually have supported women candidates on this show, so I can centralize their experience.
Okay, Cuomo.
Yeah. I am black.
I'm a woman.
I'm an immigrant.
I'm Frasier. I'm haunted.
I totally
I'm new
want
in town.
I want Trump to do that in his voice. That would be so funny. I'm a woman.
I am.
I'm a trans. It's true. I mean,
I'm an animal.
I'm every woman. Remember Shaka Khan? No one ever talks about her anymore.
I am
great black woman, strong black woman.
So,
BuzzFeed list. He actually talks like a Nazi BuzzFeed list. I realize like that's his verbiage. It's like he can textualize nonsense, except it's just really racist. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So they asked me this question, and I go like, look, organizing. I'm not like I'm not, actually out in the street with a gun or whatever. What do I actually think you should do? I think you should organize and yada, yada, yada. I started explaining just that basic concept to him. And I think I might have spoken a little bit too much, because at one point I mentioned the DSA, and he was like, what's that? Like, he didn't know what the DSA was. And I think either...
Oh, thanks for blowing our cover.
either he did know or he didn't, and he was trying to draw information out of me. But like, how do you not know what that is if this is your job, right? And I just explained the concept of organizing and why there's a left in this country, yada yada, right? And he just kind of scratches his chin, and he's like interesting. And then the weirdest thing happens.
You explain civic engagement to a guy who came here to terrorize you because of exercising your First Amendment rights. That's very interesting.
So at the end, he does the funniest shit ever to me. He goes like, well, do you have any questions for me? Like it's a job interview or something? I'm like, well, yeah, of course. And he's like, all right, well, throw one at me. And I go like, why are you defending ICE? Like, what do you think is the merit of ICE? Because I've had this conversation with police officers before, and it's usually what they'll do is the reason I asked him this question is because he told me, ICE actually fights a lot of like human trafficking and stuff like that, and also you see all these videos.
You were like, like Pizzagate. Look, I get it. Yeah, I work at a pizza place. I understand the scale of the problem. I'm
sorry. Actually, the reason I brought cops into it is because he told me, he said the same thing cops say, which is that like, those videos you see, those are only like 1% of the time. Like everything else a cop does 1%. Is great, It's
always one. It's always like the like daily barrage of like what you are literally seeing. It's 1%.
Yeah, it's
always 1%.
And it's a bunk argument from the cops because even if that's 1%, I don't want that to happen at all. That's a problem, a baseline problem that's happening even 1% of the time. And B, like you're just lying.
That was a 1% joke. Why are you here?
Your job is really important if you have a gun and you're walking around, and we trust you with this, so that shouldn't. It's a problem regardless. But the difference is that with the cops, the argument can still stand in some sense because on some level, the police have a purpose. Just on the side of their car, it says to protect and serve. Like they're telling you that they're there to protect you, and then.
Good marketing.
They end up doing all this other stuff, right?
Right.
But with ICE, their stated mission is fascism. So I don't care if you're telling me...
So even in like a revolutionary context, we abolish policing. There's going to be like something that fulfills that function, right? Like even in an enlightened society, there is something that has some type of function of like this group of people responds to, I don't know,
community
abuse.
Police or something like that.
Yeah, community police, whatever. They say community policing, whatever. In a healthy society, there's no analogous.
And it's not punitive carceration.
Right.
It's for protection of the community.
It's for protection of the community. Versus like we were designed to break families apart at the border and take 5-year-olds seeking refuge into cages. That was explicitly why we created.
That's their stated job.
Right.
It's bad, which is why like I also am not like I believe in police abolition too, but they're at least the
totally,
argument makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
When you put it that way about cops.
We're in the realm of reality here when you talk about the ICE is a different thing.
But with ICE, so I asked him like, okay, well, if you were going to throw this argument at me, this similar argument to what cops throw at me, like what's the good work that I'm not seeing that's not happening outside of these videos being the outlier or whatever? And he says, ICE fights human trafficking. And I'm kind of involved in some activism against Sesta Fosta and
satire. Oh no, serious. Okay.
Woo, satire.
Which is the legislation that essentially would make sex workers' lives significantly more dangerous.
It has
by pushing their work offline.
Yeah, by disrupting their ability to communicate with each other, screen clients, etc. If you look into it, it's blatantly from like Christian right.
But there's a lot more opportunity for pimps, which are jobs. Actually, so real quick, here's what we gotta do. I want for a second, just because we're gonna finish your story in the post game.
Okay.
But briefly, Bri, as an attorney, I know you're a former attorney, but I need to hear some of your thoughts on this story. And honestly, like, what would you do if you were advising somebody in an analogous position?
This is not legal advice.
This is legal advice.
Nor was I in any way the type of attorney that would have dealt with these kinds of cases.
both First Amendment cases and criminal justice, and this is legal advice you should follow very closely. Okay, go ahead, Bri.
I am curious.
Satire.
Don't
stop it.
what did they say when you opened the door?
I mean, I don't remember quite well because I was hungover and I've been awake for 5 seconds. But they
did you challenge whether they could come in?
So,
did you ask for?
I don't remember.
I don't know how the FBI
said you have a bad
warrant,
client,
any kind of probable cause.
Consider you have a really irresponsible bad client.
You consider that, yes.
And when they started taking pictures, was there any conversation about their authority to do so?
No, they just went for it.
Wow.
I might ask the question. I don't know the answer. I frankly don't know what the FBI can get away with, but I feel like they still can't come in without probable cause. And they might not. Maybe they shouldn't have gotten past the door. Perhaps they would have come back. Maybe.
Yeah, I've been told that they can come in if you invite them in, like vampires.
Like vampires. That's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's the vampire clause.
And then once you're in,
hey, little fucking fruit comic, let us in. Dude, it's fucking vampire clause. We said it. We're in.
Yeah.
You know, like we're like working against like sex trafficking, which is super bad. You never like heard of Ashton Kutcher, dude? Like seriously.
Oh my god.
but yeah, once they're in, you're allowed to like search what you can see, as I recall from a class very long ago. So like say,
good thing your gravity bomb.
There's like a Fourth Amendment, like if you're walking by a house and you can see in a window or something, like sitting on a porch, like they're allowed to go for what is like in plain sight. If they pull you over in a car and it's on the back seat, you don't need probable cause. If they want to open your trunk, that's different, right? So once they're in, suddenly all the corn material comes into play. And they can like take their pics and yada yada, I believe. Although there still could have been maybe a moment where you were like, "Why are you taking pictures?" and then kind of revoked access and said, "Actually, get out. I don't consent to that."
No more affirmative consent.
I mean, yeah, like maybe, I don't know. Again, I graduated from law school like 8 years ago.
Sure. Well, I think it might be irrelevant because other than someone in there smoking some weed or something, there wasn't really much going on. I didn't think about that because I don't smoke weed, so I'm just a drunk, which is entirely legal. So
right,
I was like, yeah, whatever, come in, let's do some shots.
If you're innocent, you don't need rights.
Yeah, you're drunk, you don't need rights. That's really the conclusion of the first half of today's show. Everybody, as always, I want to thank all of you. We really are growing significantly. That 2,000 patron goal is in our sights. We are on the move. Thank you to DJ Danarchy. Thank you to super producer Matt Lex, super producer David Slavic, head theoretician David Griscom. Thank you to all of you. We are growing and growing and growing and getting this all out there. And I appreciate all of you for helping us do that. Join so you can join us in the post game. We've got calls, we've got IMs, we've got Discord questions, and we've got some, well, we're going to make fun of Ben Shapiro. We're going to make fun of Jordan Peterson. And so much more. This Sunday, Illicit History on the concept of respecting borders across the hemisphere with Derek Davidson. We're doing an illicit history of everything from the good neighbor policy to destabilization in Venezuela today. And then, of course, coming out on Friday, fresh Woke Bros. It was a wet dream week for Big Waz. A new Drake album, and LeBron is in LA. It's going to be disgusting. I'm going to have to deal with it. But I will soldier on for the TMBS 13 community. Thank you, everybody. Patreon.com/TMBS. We'll see you in the postgame.